Hello and welcome back. It has been a long summer. We've had the Olympics, we've had the transfer window, but finally this week, the WSL will be back underway, and we've already got a bit carried away backstage talking about FBL, and there will be so much to talk about today. So let's get into it. Yes, hello and welcome back. We finally get to talk about the WSL once more. We'll make sure there are a variety of shows throughout the season, but I'm sure this will be something that we do come back to throughout, and very exciting to get into. We've got Nancy and Rob with us today. Nancy, how are you?
Just remember to unmute yourself. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It does literally feel like it's been ages since we've had any Women's Super League, so I'm very excited for the start of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll wait for Rob to come back, but Connor, how are we doing? I know it's back to back for you.
I know it's been an awfully long time since I've been on this channel as well. I was trying to think when the last show I was on. It was definitely like either pre or during the Olympics. So it's been a while since I've been on here. So I'm glad to be back and talking about the wider discussion around the WSL. I'm just glad that I said this on the last show. I was just glad the WSL's back because it's such a long gap between the middle of May to now. I mean, what's that, 4 or 5 months? It's too long for me. So no, I'm just glad it's finally back coming Friday. So yes, can't wait.
No, absolutely. I'm very glad to be seeing regular football I can attend back, because even the Championship doesn't have that many teams like near me in the country. So yes, very excited for that. We've already getting predictions in the chat, so we better crack on with the show, and we'll say hello to Rob at some point. Rob, how are we?
Yeah, good. Sorry, I was just sorting out a couple of technical issues.
Yeah, no worries. It's good to have you with us. Yeah, just hello to everyone in the chat. We've had a few hellos, but we'll get straight into it because we've got plenty to cover tonight. We're going to start off with a bit of a transfer window roundup because that's what we've seen so far. That's the only action, plus any preseason friendlies, that we can kind of base our predictions off from last season. Just going to go round the panel, I guess, and just first, like, initial thoughts of who potentially has had the best transfer window, and maybe any standout signings for you all. Connor, if we start with you.
I might shock everyone and really upset Shawnee. The general consensus seems to be amongst WSL fans that Brighton have had this absolutely unbelievable, exceptional window. I don't think it's as good as people are making it out. And the reason I say that is because I feel like they've had a great window. Don't get me wrong. They're definitely up there in terms of the best window. But I don't think it's been as good as people are making out, purely because I still think they're a bit too top heavy. I think they can be got at, and I'll come to that a little bit later on, I'm sure. And the players that they've signed, the forward lines, again, bit hit and miss on how they're going to carry on. They're kind of past the peak of their career now and on the decline a little bit. So that's the first thing I say on that. In terms of who's had the best window, I mean, I'm going to sound really biased if I say United, so I'm going to have to say somebody else because I feel like that's just the obvious one that people expect. On a serious note, I will say I think United have had a very good window because they've kept a lot of players. They've not let that many go. And brought in very well. Aside from that, I think Chelsea just do what Chelsea do. They've bought very well, and the players that have gone, Jess Carter maybe aside, I think is probably who you would expect to leave. So I think that's probably about right. City never do too much business. So I'm finding this really hard to think who's actually had a best window without saying United because I don't know who else.
Go on, make your case for United.
The reason why I would say United is because I think they've plugged the gaps that were missing last season in fullback areas. Gabby George is coming back. Anna Sandberg came in, who's a great young prospect as well, who's kind of had caps at international level already. Keeping Melvie Mallard is an important one. They've signed the second top scorer in the league last season, Elizabeth Turland, to go in the front line. You've got young prospects in Simia Wujo coming in as well. And then you've got the return of Grace Clinton, like I said, Gabby George coming back from injury, Emma Watson's coming through as well. You've got a lot of players that maybe weren't signings that have also come into the team and bolstered it. So, and Dominique Janssen is another player as well. I've definitely missed Slim Bizet. I knew there was somebody I was missing, but I feel like United have just bought smart, and that's why I would say United are probably up there. Whether it's the best or not, I don't know, but I think United are definitely in the conversation, just purely because you look at last summer, United let about 19 players go. this summer it was about 7, including one of those being a loan. So they've not let that many go, but bought in the right areas. So I think that's the case for United, but I definitely think there's other shouts I'm just not thinking of. So I'll let one of the other two kind of put the case forward for any other teams.
Yeah, we've had a couple of agreements with you on Brighton. Sean's kind of saying he's agreeing with you actually, and then Trebuchet also saying that Brighton didn't sign enough defenders. I'm going to come to Rob because we've got Sapphire saying that they're not convinced by Chelsea's midfield, but then we also have a comment saying that Captain is better than Yui Hasegawa. So very, very odd. And yeah, what do you make of that? What do you make of? Can you give us any insight on Chelsea's window and then also your thoughts overall?
I think Chelsea have had quite an interesting window. I think there was a lot of players that left in the summer that people expected to leave. In all honesty, it got to a stage where it was kind of, the likes of Frank Kirby leaving. I think ultimately, as a phenomenal player as she was, and a phenomenal servant she was for the club, it was the right time. I think Cankovic leaving wasn't really unexpected. Jess Carter going, I think, was a sort of fallout from what's previously happened. And then the other names, Melanie Leopold's leaving. Ultimately she gave a good period to the club, and I think it was ultimately the right time for her really to move on because she wanted to try something different before, in the twilight of her career. And then the other players that have all left are all sort of, expected loanees or players, on the very fringes. Kova, who obviously had several injuries and obviously didn't stick around. Nikki Everard, who sort of, was a bit of a sort of casualty of the fact, I think, that Musovic found form. Hampton came in and really found form, and Ann-Katrin Berger was Ann-Katrin Berger. I do think Chelsea generally had a pretty decent window. I think, again, one of the other things you have to sort of account for them is the fact Vika Kaptein, who was absent previously for the previous year, then did return to the club and has come in and has looked really, really good in pre-season. I've also been really impressed by Sandy Baltimore. She is someone who is a real goal scorer and a threat off both wings. And I do actually think that Orion Jean-Francois, when she gets fully fit, will be a really good option in the midfield. Someone who can do sort of bit of everything, can sit in front of the back four, can play box to box. But what I will say is it's going to take her a bit of time to get fully fit again. So that's something, that everyone needs to sort of be aware of. I do think they're a little bit light in the midfield still. Again, the injury to Sophie Ingolstadt, obviously, I'm sure we're all echo the thoughts, and that it's a real shame to see a player, especially at sort of towards the end of her career, having another horrible sort of ACL injury, and wish her the best in all recovery. But I do think they're a little bit light in there. However, you've also then got people like Nusken who can come back into and slot back into that number 6 role. We never really saw her in there last year. Erin Cuthbert is Erin Cuthbert, and I think also you've got Bartel and people like that who've come in, and other youngsters in the academy who might be ready to step up. I think that's where, Chelsea's season will depend on an awful lot. But generally, I think they've had a pretty good window. The other team I actually think have had a really good window, and someone did mention it in the replies, I think Aston Villa have actually had a pretty decent window. I think Robinson, although she's a temperamental player, she's someone who can, provide really good quality. Bo Kearns is a good footballer, and to be honest, I'm kind of surprised Liverpool let her go. Miri Taylor, I think signing her on a permanent and sensible. Paula Thomas and Gabby Nunes, both quality players from Levante, and teams finally starting to look, towards that Spanish market. And I do think Sab D'Angelo's a sensible signing as a goalkeeper, and Chastity Grant could be the sort of player that gives you, that X factor in games, and perhaps is the replacement, I think, for Lehman you're looking at. You've also still obviously got them keeping the likes of Daly and I think Darley, which was important players to retain. So I think they're in, they've had a decent window, and I think I think they will be a tough challenge for Chelsea this week.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll come on to kind of, I guess, pre-season, because Aston Villa have had a fairly decent pre-season as well. Nancy, coming on to you, we've had Leicester mentioned by Trebuchet, that a very underrated transfer window. Are there any teams that stick out to you, or I guess any particular signings, players that you think might be someone that stands out that it hasn't really been highlighted in the transfer window?
Yeah, I think, I agree with the Villa shout. I think that's probably my top team in terms of good transfer window. I feel like all the players they made, as Robert said, are going to have quite a good impact on the team. I think someone has mentioned it, but I think Palace, like relative to their they haven't got any like marquee signings necessarily, but I think for the level that they're at and the players that they've attracted, especially some younger players like Georgia Fox coming and Poppy Pattinson coming in on loan, it's obviously maybe not sustainable for like a, you know, for the long-term future, but their main goal this season will just be stay in the WSL. So they've, you know, like Josie Green, Verhey, the defender who came from Everton. I think they've got a good mix of WSL experience and then younger talent that can slot straight into the team and wouldn't necessarily be starting for their own club. So yeah, I think they maybe have gone a bit under the radar, but I'm sure we'll get into it. I feel like their window has made me quite confident they could probably stay up this season. I would also, not just being biased, but I do think Arsenal have had a decent window. Like, I think it's not been, you know, we've seen a lot of other clubs have had a lot of outs and a lot of ins, and Arsenal maybe have done less business, but I feel like every player they have bought in is of really, really high quality, especially Dom Solar, Rosa Kafaji and Caldente. I think all three of those will have a massive impact on the season. So it seems like some good business there.
Yeah, it certainly seemed to work for City last season when I mean, they had a very quiet window in the summer and then went on to have a really good season. Nearly taking it from Chelsea, but not quite. But we will now get over into our predictions and we're going to start with the top of the table and then work our way down. And obviously this is slightly subjective depending on who we think might be in and around the top of the table. But I've kind of grouped it where you've got your Chelsea, City, Arsenal's, United, potentially Liverpool pushing again, potentially Tottenham pushing into that, but that kind of comes into it a little bit down. I guess the first question for everyone is just who do we think will be in that race for the title come the end of the season? Do we think all three, all four will be contenders by, I don't know, like March time? Or can we see it becoming a bit of a two-horse race again? I know it's really hard to kind of put anything on it at this point, but who can you see like up there in the Champions League spots this season? I'll let anyone kind of jump in on that one.
I mean, I can keep it. I mean, my top three, you're not going to like this. my top three does leave Arsenal out of it purely because I think, you know, I think what we're going to see this season in terms of I'm going to call it a top four because I think you're going to have a top two of Chelsea and City. And I think those two will be competing. Then you'll have United and Arsenal competing for third and fourth. I think there's going to be a bit of a gap, maybe like a 4 or 5 point gap between kind of second and third. And that will start to emerge as the season goes on. It's hard to look past Chelsea because they just keep winning it every season. You know, even last season when you finally thought City were going to take over, then Chelsea win it again. So it's hard to look past them, to be honest. But I do think City will win it this year. I think the squad is there. Joe Rourke coming back, Miedemar going in. They've kept hold of Hemp and Kelly, and Hasegawa signed last season as well for another extension. So I put City in first for that reason, with Chelsea not far behind. And I really think that third spot is just a toss-up between United and Arsenal. From a United point of view, it really depends how the team settles, because. Again, I know people aren't not going to like this, but a few seasons ago, no one thought United were going to be pushing for the title because they were nowhere near the season before. And then they did. They went on a serious title challenge with Chelsea. This season, it could be more of that, or it could be more of what we saw last season. United are competing for fifth and sixth with kind of Spurs and Liverpool. So it really depends there. But yeah, my top three would be City, Chelsea, United at the moment in that order. But United, there's a big like asterisk next to it because I really don't know what United we're going to see next season, if that makes sense.
For me, one of the big question marks over United, and obviously you don't hope this happens to anyone, but if you obviously do lose, Fallon to any injury at any point, you'll then bring in, I think, is it Middleton Patel is the backup, and you've got someone who is a very talented young goalkeeper, but is someone who has, no WSL experience. And it's some players do thrive. Obviously, we've seen Kiara Keating and stuff be thrown in straight at the WSL level and thrive. But I don't know. I feel that could be the sort of thing that could really, really disrupt the season and cause massive disruption to a season. And I do also think that, I do think Chelsea and City are going to be honest, I think they'll have a little bit of a gap to third. I do think Arsenal probably take third again. But I think my biggest issue with Arsenal, and the thing that I think holds me back from saying they have a proper title challenge, is that I'm not necessarily sure if they've got that pure goal scorer. I think if Blackstenius can have a very good season, they have that pure goal scorer. But I think Blackstenius, unfortunately, is one of those players that could score a hat-trick one week and then disappear for a couple of weeks. And I think Russo, she's a phenomenal all-round footballer, but I'm still not necessarily convinced she's that pure goal scorer that you need up front, the likes of, a Shaw or Sam Kerr or even a Rachel Daly up front that's like a pure finisher. She may turn out, this may be the year where she hits that level. Obviously, she's now, I think, 25, 26. So she's no longer what you can call a young player. And you're kind of expecting that level of sort of consistency. I do really think that the one for Arsenal I do think will be interesting is I think Caldente will have a very, very good season. And I think if they can get Caldente firing, you've got someone there that can get into double figures, for the goals and probably for the assists, because she's a very, very good and smart footballer.
Yeah, I feel like Arsenal, a lot of the goals could come from elsewhere on the pitch. Like, I would also hope that one of our strikers will have a season where they hit double figures and really kind of establish themselves. But yeah, I'd hope that they could come from elsewhere on the pitch. I think Chelsea and City will be up there. I would also put Arsenal in that top three as well, and United as the team that misses out. I just think if you look at United have such high turnover. Traditionally, have had a manager that has kind of. I worry for some of these players coming in. I think it's been a strong window, but we've traditionally seen some great players go into United and they're not getting played. And I know I've spoken about it a lot, but that's I just kind of I don't necessarily know if all those players will bed in straight away, and it's just kind of the nature of the players that have gone, like Katie Zellum. Losing Katie Zellum is quite an authoritative member of the squad to lose. I think technically Arsenal have the most. Arsenal and City, the teams that are kind of being settled the most. Like Chelsea, like high turnover again. New manager. City are being pretty stable. I worry about their defense. I think they've got like a really good back four, but then if any of those get injured, then it's kind of like a lot of youth players. So yeah, I'd say I would be. I think come March it'll be Arsenal, City, and Chelsea kind of going for it, and United will be a bit off the pace potentially.
The one caveat, sorry, Laura, I just want to throw from a United point of view, and I've said this publicly, so I'm allowed to say it within reason. When I say it depends how United settle, is I from what I understand of pre-season, we're going to see a different setup from United next season. Now, whether that works or not, I've got no idea because I'm going off what I've heard from pre-season. It sounds like it's been okay, but again, it's not fully tested in the league yet, but it is going to be a lot of change and players playing in positions that you probably don't expect them to be in. And I think that's exciting as a fan because you're going into a season going, I've got no idea how we're going to line up on come Saturday. But it's also a case of, that's why I say there's a big asterisk next to United in my prediction, because I really don't know how that system is going to settle. And it may get scrapped after a couple of weeks if it's not already working. Obviously, Chelsea and United meet on match day 3. So I think I'm not disagreeing with Arsenal in the top 3, because I think from United's point of view, to go from 5th to 3rd, that is a bit of a jump. And the points, I don't even know what the points gap finished in the end, but it felt like it was a lot between United and Arsenal finished 3rd. That is a big amount of points to make up. But I think you'll see from United by match day 6, because by that point, United would have already played Chelsea and Arsenal. You'll see where they're going to be, I think, in the season. That'll be kind of the test for them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of like what ifs about this season, a bit more than other seasons, with Chelsea having a new manager. I also think there's the kind of, we've spoken about City's depth, and then having Champions League on top of that they didn't have last season. There's a few kind of, I don't know, maybes that make it very hard to kind of say this team will definitely do that. I think I agree with the top 3 of Arsenal, City, Chelsea. Yeah, we've had a few different comments. Plenty agreeing that City have a kind of lack of depth in defence.
I will also say, just on the Champions League thing, I do expect Arsenal not to have too much problem over 2 legs against Harkin. I think they might struggle in one of the 2 games, because I saw them last year against Chelsea, and Harkin can be very, very drilled and disciplined, especially away from home. I think it's a good thing that Arsenal have the first leg, I think, away, because it gives them a chance to bring something back. And I think if they bring something back, they can pick them off the Emirates. I do, however, think City might struggle over 2 legs against Paris FC. Even though Chelsea did beat them quite easily last year, it was more due to the fact, the home leg was due to the fact Sam Kerr just had a phenomenal sort of, night. She scored a hat-trick and sort of dominated brilliantly. And, completely dominated the defence. Whereas the away leg was right at the very end, and Chelsea sort of rotated, but also Paris knew they were on the way out too, and were out the competition. But I do think Paris FC is a harder challenge, and also they've got players there that have now obviously got that scalp last year. They've had the experience of playing in the competition, and they just feel like someone who they are going to be up in there or thereabouts at the end of the season in D1 Arkema in France. So I think you have to give them respect, and I think City's biggest sort of problem might be, whereas last year United gave PSG too much respect early in the tie and lost the tie in the first. I think City have to actually give Paris FC the respect and give them the acknowledge that they're there on merit, rather than try and go out and win it in the opening 10 minutes. Obviously no Luna Ribadera. I don't think Ribadera is going to be fit, at least for the first leg, is pretty big, and obviously Chelsea bought Luna Ribadera in the summer for next year. But I do certainly think that it's something that they could. She's injured at this moment in time. That's why. Yeah, she's injured. But I do think that they've also got other players at Paris FC, people like Clara Matteo and Nadozi, who can really cause havoc and cause problems.
Yeah, no, that'd be really interesting to see whether City do kind of get through there, and whether that will then have a knock-on effect on their ability to kind of mount a challenge on the league. We'll move on then to the middle of the table, and I guess we'll start with the teams that we think maybe can push that top 4 a little bit. We've obviously had Liverpool getting 4th last season. Aston Villa were up there the season before. We'll start with you, Nancy, this time. Do you think that one of those teams can perhaps maintain that, or in Villa's case, regain that? Or could we see like Spurs continue their improvement? Who can you see being, I guess, that surprise team that kind of really gives the top 4 a run for their money?
My controversial view on Spurs is I think they will really struggle this season. I think they might have a really difficult year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think especially with Clinton and Vise going. Although I do think Hayley Rasso is a good move for both parties there. But I agree, I think they might struggle. I've actually predicted the table. I've put them at 8th. I think Villa will... That's not even bias. I think Villa will regain potentially their threat. I think it maybe Carla Ward going is quite a big loss, but as we've spoken about, I think they've had a really good transfer window and they've kept their experienced players, but they've also brought in some exciting younger players as well. So I think that'd be quite a good mix. I think Liverpool, I'm not sure they'll really be at quite the same level where they're taking points off big teams and in that top 4, but I think their window was a bit strange. There wasn't really too much movement at all. I don't think they really kind of like, I think some teams like Villa, there was, I think, quite an obvious statement of intent. And I think Liverpool, there wasn't really that. It was kind of like, we'll just stick to kind of what we were doing last season and hope it pays off. And I think a lot of teams around them have strengthened, which is why I think they will be mid-table, but I don't think they'd be kind of surprising everyone as we thought. I do think Spurs might struggle a little. I think Leicester might struggle a bit as well. Brighton, I did agree with Connor's point at the start as well about I feel like we've seen it quite a few times in the WSL where a team will go out and buy quite big names and it hasn't worked. I feel like it's happened with Everton a couple of times. And in this situation, there's just a lot of players gone out, a lot of players come in, new manager. And while some of the players that they have got, particularly Kirby, are really, really top level players, it's going to be a really fast turnaround to get all those players integrated and going straight off the bat. So yeah, I think for me, out of all the others, Villa are probably the most threatening team.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. I also think Liverpool will potentially, when you look at all their kind of stats from last season, they seem to be outperforming their stats quite a lot. So I can't see them necessarily maintaining that. Rob, I guess, do you have any other different takes to that, and how can you see that mid-table battle kind of playing out?
I suppose the only team I was sort of slightly concerned about, and usually I say this was every single window, so it's it's not normal, not new, sorry. Is I'm not necessarily sure about Everton. Like I think they've got a really good manager there, and I think they've got some really good players. But I'm looking at some of the signings that have been made. I think they're good players, but I'm just not necessarily sure there's enough of them, and I'm also not really sure where the goals are coming from. It feels like they have got some really nice sort of technicians in there. I think Hayashi is a very good signing. I think Mel Lawley's a decent player. Sari is that sort of player that can produce a bit of quality. But that's the question. I mean, who would you expect Everton to have up front this season? Obviously, they've lost Piemonte. They've lost Benison to Juventus. I was trying to remember her name. And I think, I'm just looking at that squad and thinking it feels like the sort of team, Snoyce is a good player, but I don't necessarily put her in that sort of 20 goal a season bracket. I think she's a perfectly solid forward. I think she works really hard. She leads the line, but there's not too much there beside her. I mean, Heather Payne is, a sort of solid, hard-working player. If you really need to, you can obviously put Rika Madsen in there up front. But again, I'm not really sure these are goal scorers. And it feels like the sort of situation where they could lack. Yeah, I think this is it. I think they really benefit from the fact they've got Brosnan, who I think is, one of the best goalkeepers in the league. Obviously not a fault shared by EAFC, but I think that says more about their video game and the way they rank than anything else. And yeah, Gabara, again, a good player. It's not they haven't got good players. It's just you're looking at it and you're thinking in these tight games against the likes of, teams like Leicester, West Ham, Crystal Palace, where you're thinking this needs to be 3 points to stay up. I'm not necessarily seeing who's going to be, the complete difference maker for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess, Connor, come on to you, and I think this kind of brings us on a little bit to the bottom of the table conversation, in a sense. Obviously, feel free to chip in on anything that's been said so far as well. We've had a comment that's Aston Villa, we definitely got the table, Spurs drop down Brighton, but Crystal Palace to finish ahead of Everton and West Ham. Do you think that Crystal Palace can be pushing that mid-table, or is it really, if you come up from the Championship, it's going to be a bit of a relegation fight and just be happy to stay up?
The very short answer, Palace won't be pushing mid-table. Before I get to that kind of thing, and I will give my reason for that in a second, because I only fell off my chair then when Nancy said Spurs all the way down in kind of 8th place. And when I did my kind of 1 to 12, I've got Spurs just missing out on the kind of top 4 and kind of that 5th place, is the best of the rest, so to speak, in terms of that. Because I do think the squad, yes, obviously, Celine and Grace, obviously both coming over to United, I still think that squad is there, and I think Robert Villahan is a very, very good manager to get the best out of those players that is currently there as well. So my 5 to 8 is Spurs, Villa, Liverpool, Brighton in that order. Because I think Liverpool will drop away. I think letting Koivisto went and a couple of other players that were kind of key last season as well. I just don't think you can keep the same in the WSL. I don't think you can keep doing the same thing. We saw that with Villa. They had one really good season and kind of pushed on, then last season fell away. I think that will be similar with Liverpool this season, and I gave my reason for Brian at the start. Do you want me to say who I think is going to go down? Do you want me to go all the way down to the bottom, or do you want me to do kind of?
Yeah, let's move on to that now. We're doing bottom of the table next, so let's push on.
Because I do have Palace staying up, and I've got West Ham going down because I feel like this. Sorry if there's any West Ham fans watching. They're overdue a relegation, I think, because they remind me of Sunderland men's side. They're kind of flirting with the idea of relegation, kind of there or thereabouts, and eventually they will go down at some point. Certainly, if the league moves to 2 down in the near future or whatever, they will definitely be in that bracket, I feel like. But I've got West Ham to go down because I just don't. Their squad is actually really good, and I think they've got some exceptional players, and I think they'll cause United some problems on Saturday at Old Trafford. But I don't think. I don't know. Maybe it's because I just want to go for something different. I don't want to keep seeing teams coming up and then going straight back down and coming up and going straight back down. Because I just don't think it's a good advert for the Championship when teams are coming up and just cannot stay there and just constantly going back. Because you're just always yo-yoing them with various different teams. So my bottom three, I've got kind of Leicester in 10, Palace in 11, West Ham in 12, purely just because I want to see Palace stay up. And I think West Ham have kind of been flirting with that idea for a long time. For various reasons, obviously with money backing and things like that. The signings last summer did, to be fair, keep them up. Last January, did keep them up in the end. And I think the fact that Bristol just couldn't win any games ultimately kept West Ham up rather than West Ham doing anything exceptional. So yeah, that's kind of my bottom three. I wouldn't be surprised to see Leicester kind of near kind of 10th, 11th, but I don't think they'll go down either. So for me, it's between Palace and West Ham for that kind of bottom two, and it's kind of take your pick out of those two, really.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Rob, any different thoughts to that, or pretty much in agreement?
Yeah, very, very similar. I mean, I would say I think it's disappointing with Palace that obviously Elise Hughes is going to be missing for most of the season due to her ACL that she suffered on the final day of the season. Because that to me looked like the sort of player that she is a goal scorer, and it's someone who was going to be able to show what they could do at the top level. And granted, you don't ever really know with goal scorers if they are going to be able to adapt. It's very, very different playing in the Championship to playing at the top level. But I do think that she was someone who looked like they could, they could show what they're doing, and they really could, really sort of be key in those sort of tight games. I also do think that it's going to be one of those situations, unfortunately, where a team is going to stay up with quite a low points total, and it's going to be a case as to whether they can win the games against the teams that are in and around them. I do think, again, at the end of last season, people do forget that sort of at the very end of last year, Leicester actually had quite a poor end to the season and did really plummet. And a lot of that was helped out by the fact they had the FA Cup run. But I do think they are one of those sides. I think they're a very good side in terms of they play really good football. But I do worry that they're one of those teams that you could fall into the trap of saying, oh, yeah, they play, they ended up finishing sort of, I think, was it 10th? Yeah, they ended up finishing 10th, just 3 points behind West Ham, and went on a horrible run of form towards the end of the season. I do worry they could be one of those teams that end up, you say, oh, they've got a very good, they play really nice football and they're really attractive to watch, but ultimately they don't cut the points for it.
Yeah, we've had a few comments that I might come to you on, Nancy, just to mix it up. We've got Trebuchet saying that only if Stengel has a blinder of a season will Palace stay up. And then we've also got Trebuchet saying if Goriase and Ueki stay fit, then West Ham stay up. So very dependent on a few key players, but also shouts for Shemek and Gori being pretty key to West Ham. You've said you predicted your league. Who did you have as the relegated team, and I guess why?
Yeah, I did actually. I went with West Ham as well. I agreed with Connor. I think Gori staying fit is actually quite a big ask. I don't. She does seem like she's a great player, but really her career at West Ham has been quite blighted by injury. I do think what was quite interesting about last season's relegation battle is West Ham and Bristol were pretty much neck on neck, and then we hit the January transfer window, and West Ham had the finances to go and buy players that could help them, and that kind of did make the difference in the end. I think it was almost a question of resources. Bristol weren't able to get players in that could really help them push on in the second half of the season. It's kind of interesting to see that dynamic. Maybe I don't think will play out as much because both Palace and West Ham are backed by Premier League clubs. So yeah, I mean, Katie Stengel having a blinder isn't impossible. I think maybe it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. I do think Palace have a good enough team to stay up, and I think maybe the players that I think West Ham have had a tricky window, and the players that they have, like Gori, are quite injury prone. So they are only a few injuries away from having quite a tough season. I do think Everton as well. Like I know Rob commented on them. I think again, if you talk about this finances and and resources, Everton are in a really sticky spot at the moment with money, and I think that's been reflected in the transfer window. They've had to they can't really splash the cash, so if they find themselves in a bit of a tricky situation, they might not be able to get themselves out of it. So they might be a bit of a, if there's such thing as a dark horse for relegation, it could be Everton as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I also think it's interesting in terms of like the valuation and how much people are willing to invest. I saw, obviously, it's been said in the chat that West Ham don't have any games at the whatever it's called, Queen Elizabeth Stadium this season, and I feel like they're overdue in the sense that a relegation, in the sense that they don't feel like they always take their women's team seriously. But then you look at Crystal Palace, and I think this feels like the other end of the spectrum where it's maybe a bit too far. But I think I saw on Twitter, and I haven't fact-checked this, so someone tell me if I'm wrong on this, but tickets to Selhurst Park for their games are like 20 quid, which is more than the Emirates.
Yes, they are.
Games. Yeah.
That's what's put me off going to Selhurst. Which
is crazy, but I guess at least they value their women's team, which is nice to an extent. But yeah, makes it an expensive trip. The London Stadium, sorry. I know that's been renamed several times, I feel. We're going to move on then to our quick fire predictions. So obviously feel free to get involved with this in the chat. Essentially keep your answers relatively brief, but we're going to go around and do a few categories for predictions. And obviously these will come back to haunt us at the end of the season. But it's always a fun one. So I thought we'd just throw out a few categories in there and have some fun with this one. We'll start with player of the season, and we'll work our way through to who we think might win the league. I think it's kind of, some of us have already stated claim on that one, but let's start with player of the season, and we'll go around, try and do this more random. So we'll start with the original order. We'll start with Connor for player of the season. You can give a very brief explanation if you feel it necessary as well, or you can just go with the name.
Player of the season is usually down to who wins the title, right, or something. Like, they've got to be near the top, because you could say like an outsider is somebody kind of the mid-table, but because I put City to win the league, I would say Hasegawa, because she's, for me, one of the best players they've got, but she never really gets that kind of recognition. So I'm going to go for Lauren Hemp off the basis that I think City will win the league, and obviously by proxy rack up a lot of goals, and she'll be a big part of that. Lauren James was pretty close in my thoughts though on that one.
Interesting. Rob, who's your player of the season?
Even though I don't necessarily think they'll win the league, I do think that Bunny Shaw will win it again, because I think she'll take the golden boot again if she stays fit. She's just an unbelievable centre forward.
Nancy?
Yeah, I might go for Lauren James, actually. I feel like with Chelsea kind of going through that state of flux, but I think she's going to be quite a constant presence up top and will kind of step up her game again. So yeah, LJ, I think.
Interesting. We've had a few different shouts in the chat that I'll run through very quickly. Emily's agreeing with Bunny Shaw. Sean's going with Beaver Jones. I think there's a couple here from the same person, Lauren James and Maya Ramirez, if that's at all possible. But yeah, interesting. We've had another shout for Ramirez and another shout for Aggie Beaver Jones. We're going to go with young player of the season next. So I'll come to Rob here first, and then we'll go in the same order. But obviously starting a bit further around. Young player of the season. This is tough because I don't even think I can definitely know who's in which category, but just a roughly young player.
See, that's the one I do think will go to Aggie Beaver Jones, because I think she had a good year last year. I think scored 12. She's had such a very good pre-season. She's going to get to play up front at least at the start of the season. And when she's played up front, she's looked very, very clinical. And I think this is the year she announces herself as a really, really very, very good centre forward.
Nancy?
My predictions are in complete isolation to each other, by the way, because they don't really make sense. But I'm going with Rosa Kafaji, just because I already love her, and she's 21, I think, which is young. I mean, obviously saying James wins Player of the Year and Kafaji Young Player of the Year, I think normally you obviously get those players from the winning team, but I think she's just going to be, when I've watched her play already, she's just always on it, like such a great attacking player, and I think will have a massive impact for Arsenal. And if Arsenal do win the league, I think she could have a massive part to play.
Interesting. Connor?
What classes is young? What's young player these days? Is it 22 and under 23?
I think LJ's still available, eligible. Rob, can you shed more light on this? I should have done the research on it.
Isn't it? I think it's under 20. They need to be under 24 at the start of the season, or at the start of the season, or under 23 at the start of the season. I know that's why Lauren Hemp won it 6 million years in a row. But I think it's under 24. So personally, one of my views, and I'll just put this in here, I would change young player of the season to actually be rookie of the season and make the eligibility category that the player has to have less than 30 senior appearances by the end of the season, or hit 30 by the end of the season. Because I think then you actually would get young players. You wouldn't just get constant the same young player winning it over and over, which is what I think sometimes happens.
I agree. I mean, from a realistic point of view, I think it'll be Beaver Jones. But I just want to give shouts to 3 players: Jess Park, Elizabeth Turland, and Olivia Smith at Liverpool. I think she's an exceptional forward, who I think will do very well in the WSL. So they're my kind of 3 outsiders. But I think realistically, if she plays and has a consistent season, it'll be Beaver Jones, I'd have thought.
Yeah, we've had a lot of shouts for Beaver Jones. Sean saying Jess Park breakout season, a couple for Captain. Obviously, a very solid pre-season.
Can I just throw another name out that with him mentioning Olivia Smith? I think Mia Enderby's going to have a really good year at Liverpool.
Yeah, certainly lots. I think there's so many to look out for sure. In terms of my next category, then I have manager of the season, which I feel like sometimes can just be who wins it. But we did have Matt Beard shouts last season, so I think potentially you can have liberty to pick a rogue one here. We'll start. Are we on Nancy to start now? I think yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick. I'm not sure how you say his surname. Is it Robert DePau? Yeah, Robert DePau. I think this does stay consistent with my prediction that Villa will do quite well this season. I think it is a tough task coming in and taking on a new team and blending all the players. But from what I know of him, he is a very talented manager. And if Villa are kind of pushing that top 4, then it's probably well deserved.
No, interesting. I think that's definitely one of those outside shouts that could very much come to fruition. Connor, who's your shout? Against Skinner?
I don't even think he'd win that off the own fan base, even if he won the league, to be honest. I think he's lost kind of brownie points on that one. I mean, it's usually always the winner of the league, isn't it? This is the problem with, I think, these things. Matt Beard was a very good shout last year. I'm going to say, on the basis that I put Spurs 5th and challenging, I will go for Robert Villaham. I really rate him. I think he's an exceptional man and a good person as well. I do think that helps. Not that other managers aren't in the league, but I do think he's a really good character, a good person to have around, as well as the tactical side. I think when you listen to him in interviewing, the way he talks, he's very, very knowledgeable about the game. So if Spurs have a very good season, I think he's probably in with a shout, but it's most likely going to be Bonpastor or Gareth Taylor if one of those win the league, I would have thought, because that's usually the way these awards go. Yeah, interesting. Rob, anyone different?
No, I mean, again, Nancy unfortunately stole my thunder. I think DePau will be, as well as being a fantastic Arne Slot lookalike, I think he will have a very good year in charge of Villa. I think, having looked at the way his Leverkusen side played last year, they played some really nice, expansive attacking football. Their biggest issue was sort of quality of the squad, not necessarily matching some of the other teams in Frauen Bundesliga. But now that you've got a better, I think, all-round squad, it's something they could do. They could do really, really well. I think they do have a tough start, and obviously, I think if he was given a choice, away at Chelsea wouldn't have been the ideal one, but at the same time, it's the sort of thing where you're looking at it as a manager. I'm sure thinking, I can make a real statement as a scalp here, and it wouldn't necessarily shock me if they did get a scalp on Friday, because I think they're a very, very good. He's a very, very good manager.
We've had a few different shouts in the chat. We've not had DePau mentioned. Outside shout from Sean is Brian Sorensen, which goes against a few predictions on this panel of how Everton will do. Advitia said Bonpastor is Arteta level defensively, which I thought meant good because Arteta has a very good one. But then they said we will break the goals conceded record. So I'm not sure what's going on there. We've got Villaham or Gareth Taylor, and then Advitia saying Gareth Taylor is just mid. And then, yeah, so I think definitely a few, but I do agree that it tends to just go to the winner, which is the category that we will move on to next. And I think Connor may have already declared his cards on this one. But do you have any concerns over the defence? Let us know which side you have picked for sure. And do you have any concerns about the defensive depth there, or do you think they can go all the way anyway?
I mean, my City shout is more based off the fact. I mean, I want it to be United, obviously, but I just don't think United are going to make that jump. And it pains me to say City is United fan, but taking that United hat off, I just want to see someone else win the WSL. Sorry if you're not going to like this, but it's getting a bit boring just being the same team win it year after year after year. So I would like to see somebody else, albeit I'd rather not be City, if I'm being totally honest. But no, honestly, I think City ran Chelsea close last year. They probably should have won it, to be honest, in terms of obviously that game. They dropped points right at the end. You could argue the same for Chelsea in many ways. Those kind of silly drop points towards the back end of the season. But I think it's, I don't know. Yes, City have got depth potential issues in the back line. Can they compete on all fronts in the same way that Chelsea can in terms of the Champions League, should they get through to the group stages and the knockouts and so on, and the FA Cup, should they want to go into that and everything else? Can they do that? Maybe not. They might sack off one of the cup competitions if they're in the serious title charge at that point. They might just fully focus on that. They've got the teams. As I said, that midfield, you look at like Jess Park and Hasegawa and Jill Broadley back, and Miedemar can go in the 10. You've got Shaw and Kelly and Hemp and all these kind of players, and Fowler that's kind of coming into her own as well. They've got the talent. It's whether they can keep that run going from last season going into this one. So, yes, I think if they've got an injury or a few injuries, it can hamper them in a way that maybe it wouldn't for Chelsea, because Chelsea will have players returning from injury throughout the season as well. But I do think City will just pip it. But as I said, don't be surprised to be sat here in May with Chelsea with like a 6-point gap, winning the title for 6 years in a row or something now.
Yeah, Rob, can Bonpastor keep it going?
I mean, the risk of sounding boring, I see no reason why not, in all honesty. I think the squad overall is as strong as last year. I think the fact at some point you've got the return of Sam Kerr, that's another thing. I think that's going to be a massive shot in the arm for Chelsea. I think Myra Ramirez, if they can keep her fit, we've already seen, what she can do to some of the best WSL centre-backs. And I think there's just so much firepower in the squad. I do definitely think that the midfield is an issue. Obviously, losing Erin Cuthbert for a period of time would be catastrophic at this moment in time. And I do think from a defensive point of view, you've got some unknown qualities, people like Miley and Pome. But I do think that, Chelsea will want to also have a very good go in the Women's Champions League this year. I think they will know how close they got last year. Obviously, they were able to go win away in Spain, and, the home leg, I prefer not to speak. If I speak, I'm probably going to get in trouble. And I do think that they will look, they have the sort of mentality, they have the backing, they probably have the nous to go that bit further. And that's where I think is going to be an issue, because I do think if it comes down to it and let's say they're leading in a semi-final of the Champions League, and then midweek they've got to play a big game in the WSL, I think they will rotate heavily for the WSL in order to keep players for that Champions League. Because I think ultimately, and I said this on a Chelsea podcast and got an interesting response, is that would you be happy if any of the other English teams, so I included Arsenal, United or City, did a domestic treble if Chelsea won the Champions League? And my view on that very much 100% is yes. Because we need, if Chelsea can get that Champions League, I think you tick that one thing off. We've seen other teams do domestic trebles before. We've done domestic trebles before. Winning that Champions League, I think, it's obviously, only Arsenal can stand alongside sort of Chelsea in that regard. And even then, they won a very different iteration of the competition. And this is the last chance to win this iteration. Because I do think it's special when you win a competition in its different iterations. Obviously, the Champions League is going to be bizarre next year, I think, in the best way possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do think, from an Arsenal fan perspective, I'm very, very much not wanting Chelsea to win the Champions League out of anything. So I do think that's a real kind of...
Actually, that's a great question. Yeah, from an Arsenal point of view, would you be happy Chelsea winning the Champions League if you won a domestic treble?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because we need trophies at this point. I would absolutely take a domestic treble, but I don't think we'd get a domestic treble. So,
What about you, Connor? Would you be happy Arsenal winning a domestic treble if Chelsea won the Champions League? Obviously, we know United aren't
No
winning anything.
chance. Unless it's United winning a domestic
Would
treble.
you be happy if United won a domestic treble and Chelsea won the Champions League?
Oh yeah, because it obviously.
Actually, to be fair, I know you and Barry, you'd be insufferable for weeks.
Oh yeah, the Conti Cup's better than the Champions League. You don't know that. Well, it's not called the Conti Cup anymore, is it? But yeah, no, 100%.
What are they doing to our glorious competitions? At first, they came for the Arnold Clark Cup, and I didn't speak out because I was not the Arnold Clark Cup. Then they came for the Conti Cup, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
Yeah, I'll very much. I want more than a Conti Cup this season. That's that I think Idabel can't survive on Conti Cups anymore. But back to we're on winner. Nancy, can you bring an Arsenal fan any? Can you back us, or who are you saying for the title?
I think, I know it hasn't really been said here, but I do think that on paper Arsenal should kind of be the team that are really pushing for it, just because of what I've said previously about consistency, not having the kind of change going on in the squad or at a managerial level. I think we've had a few 2 or 3 seasons with Idabel now. I can't remember. It's 3 seasons. This is our 4th season with him. Is that right? Yeah, that seems like ages. Yeah, it's fourth season with him. We've made the additions that aren't going to completely alter the squad, but will enhance it. And I think it absolutely should be the time for Arsenal to capitalise on, Chelsea having changed, City maybe having to balance the Champions League and the WSL with not the best depth at the back and things like that. And I think we've got a pretty balanced squad. I know there's a few questions about our wingers, whether we've got enough, but I think in general we're in a pretty good position. And I think it'd be, for me, and I think most Arsenal fans, it'd be a massive disappointment if definitely have to be challenging for it. And if we don't win, I will see the season as a bit of an opportunity squandered, to be honest. And I think the club might also feel the same with Jonas Sardaval's time as manager. Yeah, obviously, I mean, you look at when Connor was talking about City's attack, saying about all those players, that is terrifying. But yeah, I do think defensively they might just, if they even have 1 or 2 injuries and they've got to play Champions League group stage, I think that might just be quite tough. So I think it is definitely possible. I am feeling optimistic, but obviously the match at the weekend is already going to be a massive indicator about who's going to be where at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm very nervous about that, but I do agree with you to an extent. I also agree that it feels like City and Chelsea both have, like in theory, a new manager always comes with a bit of a wobble, but whether Chelsea's squad will just kind of even out that wobble, I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see. I do think that there is potential for this season to maybe be one of the most open in a kind of title race that we've seen in quite a while. But then it also has the potential to just be another kind of blue washout. But we will see. We'll move on to our relegated pick now. And we have kind of, I think this has maybe already been done. So maybe very, very briefly, let's recap who we'd had to go down for relegation. If Rob, you want to kick us off on this one?
West Ham.
Nancy?
Yeah, West Ham as well.
Is this a full house West Ham?
Full house of West Ham, and we're never getting any West Ham viewers again. We've all just got them to go down.
I'd quite like them to go down in some ways, because I do think they're a team that hasn't necessarily backed their women's team as much, and it should give them maybe a bit of a kick up the backside, but it could also just see another kind of bad scenario in the Championship. Okay, moving on to a bit of an interesting one then. Top FBL pick, and you can, of course, join the Alpha Wofo League. The code is 8BWW2SR. If you want to come back to that point of the recording, it's at 54 minutes. But yeah, we'll start with Nancy, I think. But I mean, there's so many different routes you can go down, whether it's kind of price, whether it's just pure goals or a good position that they've been put in. Who would be your kind of FPL pick, golden gem, if you were, I guess, an FPL blogger?
Yeah, I'm not going to steal Rob's because I know what he's going to say. And I also have her in my team. And I've just looked and she's got 2.9% ownership, which I think is crazy. So I think Rob's. But also Chankovic as well for Brighton. I've got her in my team. I can't see how much she is at the moment, but from what I remember, she was quite cheap. And I think we know she's a good player, but didn't really get to show her full potential at Chelsea. And I imagine will start for Brighton pretty much every week, so could get some good points. She's not much of a goal scorer though, is she? So I think she should get points for other stuff. And I know Fantasy WSL do all the kind of like bonus points for being a good player and stuff. I think she can be a good player for Brighton, and she's cheap, basically.
Yeah, I also have her in my team. I think she's like 5.5, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
so she'll likely start most games. Connor, have you got a shout on this on an FPL pick?
In terms of most picked, I mean, the thing that they tweeted not so long back, for those who play in the Fantasy WSL, that the majority of the player base are Arsenal fans. I think it's like something like 75% of the player base are Arsenal fans. So there's a lot of you playing. So it's gonna be an Arsenal player based off that, because usually you do kind of stick in the players that you know about. I've just had a quick look at my team in terms of who's the most selected. I'm amazed, by the way. Turland's only got 7% selection. This is second top scorer in the league, West Ham at home on the first game. Not putting any pressure on her, but there could be some points to be out there. But it depends on the price. The fantasy football's an interesting one, because you are looking at a price. I think Missy Boat Kearns is 30% because of the fact that she's only 5 million and playing a decent Villa side. So I think there's elements there. It sounds really bad. Most picked is going to be one of the Arsenal players, and probably one of the Lionesses, I would have thought, at Arsenal. So whether that's Russo or Mead or Williams or somebody like that. Into most points, I don't think it'll be any of them. And I think it will be somebody like Bunny Shaw, Lauren Hemp, somebody like that. And by proxy, more and more people will start to put those players in as they start accumulating more and more points.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a few that I feel like if you play a men's game, you have to have Haaland in there. And for me, I felt Shaw was a little bit like that she's one of those strikers I just kind of had to fit in there somewhere. Rob, your shout. The anticipation's been building since Nancy tipped you off.
Yeah, it's interesting because a couple of names that have been mentioned elsewhere. I think both Enderby and Smith at Liverpool could end up being really smart shouts. I think, as I've said elsewhere, I think Caldente will turn out to be a very good shout for Arsenal. I think she'll get a high number of assists and goals, a lot of contributions. Asayi at West Ham, if West Ham score, there's a 90% chance it'll be Asayi. So I think that's a pretty good one. But I'm actually going to go for Chelsea. I'm going to go for Sandy Baltimore. I think she had a very good preseason. She's really slotted in well, can play on both sides. And the thing is, Chelsea are going to rotate and swap around the attack a lot this season. She's going to get a lot of chances, and I do think she may be one of those players that maybe gets brought on as a substitute a little bit, but comes on and gets tired legs. And she's very, very quick, and that's one thing Chelsea fans have discovered, is she's incredibly quick and very, very good at getting in on the last defender and being clinical, which I think is something, really, really important, and could lead to an awful lot of goals, especially if she's coming into games to say Chelsea are a couple of goals up and are really looking to, make hay while the sun shines.
Yeah, I think all very good shouts. Mine is that, and Connor's just put this in the chat for us, that Keating, Hampton, and Williamson are the top 3 selected so far. And I'm baffled by how many people are selecting Keating and Hampton, because they're both really expensive for goal. Well, they're expensive goalkeepers because they play for. But Valentolis Joyce is so cheap as a keeper because she didn't play last season. She's 4 mil. And to say she'll start every game for United, and they're not going to concede loads. You're not going to get amazing numbers of clean sheets anyway. So that's my pick. I just think you don't need to waste money there if you can get Valentolis Joyce in.
You're on my wavelength, or I like it.
Yeah, I'm so confused by how many teams I've seen with Keating in goal, and I just don't think it's. Anyway, I don't want to give all my tips away, but I don't think that's necessarily the best shout, especially Hampton, because you might have Musovic starting in some of the games, and then you get into 0 points. But we will, of course. We've had a few picks. I'll just read them out. Can't pronounce this now. Villamala, thank you. It's had a multiple different spellings in the chat, and it's confused me a little bit. But yeah, that's been a shout. Joanna writing Canarid, who I've definitely also pronounced wrong because I'm not doing the accent. But she's up there. I think she's quite expensive at 9 mil, but definitely a good shout for points potentially. She's been playing very well in pre-season. But yeah, I don't think I've missed any there potentially. But we're going to move on to the weekend's fixtures very briefly at the end of this. And what I've asked is kind of the panel to maybe, and there's obviously a potentially very obvious big fixture happening this weekend that might be the pick of the bunch. But if we can go around and maybe, I did watch the pronunciation video, Trebuchet. I just need to watch it directly before pronouncing those names. I did also have to do a commentary on a Chelsea, and I was made for my uni course. This is absolute brutal punishment to do a highlights package of Arsenal versus Chelsea at Stamford Bridge last season. So I had to watch it about 3 times. Arsenal lose to Chelsea, which was just absolutely terrible, and then obviously have to pronounce those names. So I should absolutely be able to pronounce them.
How many soft jokes did you manage to fit into that highlights package? Because if so, then wasted opportunity.
No, I put a lot in there. I think Chelsea put a sock in there. Arsenal's title hopes.
Nice. Was that the only thing make it moderately bearable?
Yeah, just the number of puns that I could get in there was definitely up there. Arsenal will have to pull their socks up should they hope to. There was a few. That was keeping me going in those late nights trying to get that one submitted. But we will get on to this weekend's fixtures. And yeah, basically, I'm going to go around the panel. Maybe highlight a game that you think and give us a prediction for that game. Try and make it different to the person before you. But obviously, yeah, we will maybe all predict the big game because we have had a request for let's predict the Arsenal versus City game. So maybe all a prediction for the big game, and then aside from that one, a shout out for another game that you might be keeping an eye on this weekend. Connor, we'll start with you.
Shall I just pick United because no one else is going to say it? And that gives Robin and Nancy a chance for another game there. I will just say that one, just obviously because I can speak about that a bit more. I think obviously with it being Old Trafford, I think is interesting. That's certainly divided opinion. I'll come back to that in a second. But I think it was, as I said, I think United are going to set up differently this year. There's a lot of new players. It's a new captain. It's a new goalkeeper. We've never played in the WSL without Mario, so everything is new pretty much, bar obviously the manager and a couple of other players that were there from last year. So it's a clean slate for a lot of people. And obviously West Ham is probably one of the best. West Ham at home is probably one of the best fixtures you can have to try and get some momentum from a United point of view. So, but there's a 1% chance if that game goes wrong that it could be a signal for a very, very long season for United, and certainly for Mark Skinner as well. So it's an interesting one. It's not going to be a big grandstand game. It's caused a bit of controversy because it's being played at Old Trafford, and it's going to be by far the lowest attendance we've ever had at Old Trafford. For those of you who aren't aware, they've now moved everyone's tickets, and they're only opening one stand at Old Trafford because the ticket sales are that low for this game. Number of factors for that. So it's a really intriguing one for that reason, because it's just no one knows what United are going to bring. And similar to West Ham, obviously I've got them going down, but that's one to keep an eye on for sure. In terms of Arsenal City, I mean, you could write a million headlines and it's probably not going to be any of them. And the thing is, it's being built up. You just know it's going to be like a 0-0 ball fest now, don't you? Because it's being built up into this amazing thing. Miedemar is going to be battle and all this kind of thing. Everything's built up to it. It's going to be the most boring game. This is going to finish 0-0, isn't it? But I still think City win the league, but I think Arsenal win this game. I think, to put it short. I think if this was the other way around, I think City win it. But I think at home, starting the season there, I think Arsenal probably will just get over the line. Everyone says 2-1 in big games, don't they? I'm going to say 3-2 just to be different, because 2-1 is always the default score in big matches, I see. So, yeah, 3-2 Arsenal. I do think Miedemar will score. She's going to, isn't she? It's just going to happen. And I don't think she'll celebrate, for those asking on that one.
She doesn't celebrate anyway, but
Yeah, I was going to say she doesn't
she's
celebrate.
already sorted that for herself by never celebrating.
Yeah, you can't write then doesn't celebrate headline when it's not not anything.
If she doesn't celebrate, does that mean you have to write celebrates headline?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, celebrates by not celebrating.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would
Who
be
knows?
grandstand. Can you imagine if she did?
It'd be very
She
pointed
wouldn't,
if
but
she did.
Can I just say, if she did like full Adebayor in front of Jonas Edeval, she will earn a million respect points from myself. I don't think she will. I think she's far too classy for that. But that would. Like that, or alternatively, the Cantona collar up, I think would be incredibly good. Someone had said, I wonder if Viv will even play. I do wonder if Miedemar will play. I think they might use her in the Champions League tomorrow. And this is what's going to be fascinating, I think, is City fitting Miedemar and Bunny Shoring, because it's a fantastic prospect on paper. And you'll look at it on paper thinking, wow. But there are plenty of times in the past where you've had two brilliant strikers or two brilliant attackers in the same side. And that they can't all be, Frank Kirby and Sam Kerr. It doesn't always necessarily gel like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that one. I don't necessarily know if she'll even play. I think she'll certainly not start. I don't expect to start, but yeah, we'll see on that one. It'll be interesting. Nancy, we'll come to you on the Man City Arsenal game then, and then we'll come back for you on Rob's picks for games.
Yeah, I think I would actually go with something like 1-1. And which I also don't think either team would be too upset with. It's almost like in this situation, both teams will know that they just have to keep pace. You don't want to be the team that's gone 3 points behind their title rival already. I'm not saying they'll play for a draw, but I think it might be something like 1-1 and kind of everyone will go away like maybe annoyed they didn't win, but quite content. I could see it being something like that. I think another interesting factor is I haven't really seen anything about tickets or how many seats have been sold. I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, there's been a big thing made about the Emirates being, we've sold it out 2 times last season, and it's been maybe not a fortress as such, but that's a big advantage having that atmosphere. But I haven't really seen much. I haven't seen any figure. I don't really know what crowd to expect. I'm sure later down the week they will, but I would hope if we could get 40,000, that would be a big boost for Arsenal, and it might give the team a slight advantage. But yeah, I'm going to predict 1-1.
Yeah, I know. I don't think that's a decent shout. Rob, we'll come to you. I don't know if you gave a score, so if you didn't, go for it. Go for a score line.
I mean, I'm hoping for like some absolute just chaos and nonsense. Like 4-4 would quite happily do me. To be fair, you usually do get at least one like ridiculous scoreline on the opening day. On the WSL, a couple of years ago, we had the Villa 4-3 against City. Last year, you had all the chaos of Villa versus Man United, and also Liverpool obviously winning at the Emirates. I do think that might be the game where you get the crazy scoreline. I could see something like a 4-4 because I think both teams have the attacking quality, and I think City will be determined to go out against Arsenal and not end up in a situation like they ended up with the end of last season, where obviously Arsenal were able to turn it around late on and effectively kill the title hopes. Massive thanks to Stina Blackstenius, by the way. Still my favourite one of the Chelsea trophies that she's actually helped us win as opposed to taking away from us. But I do think that I do think that's an interesting one. Obviously, but my eyes are obviously drawn to Chelsea on the Friday night against Aston Villa. I think it's I really like Friday night under the lights at Kings Meadow. It's going to be a cracking atmosphere. I think Bonpastor, in the final game, you saw that if Chelsea really get motoring, they can score at will. Villa, I think, will come not necessarily to try and spoil. I think they will come to try and play football themselves. And I think it's a big game. So obviously, if Chelsea can get a good win off and get a good start, it then I think puts more pressure on City and Arsenal to get the result even a day later, because you don't want to end 3 points behind and say -3 goal difference to someone else. But at the same time, if Villa do come and get a point or even win it, then that's a massive incentive for Arsenal and City to sort of look at and think, hang on, here's a chance to really build up the gap here. And I think the early gaps are such an important thing. Sam Kerr won't play; she's still not fit. Just in regards to an earlier question as well about Julia Bartel. Bartel's been at the Under-20 World Cup, but she's expected to feature quite heavily this season. She's really impressed Bonpastor in training. And due to the injury against Sophie Ingle, it means Chelsea are even lighter in the midfield, so the onus is even further on her.
I was going to bring that question up, so thank you for doing that job for me. I would happily take a 4-4, to be honest, because I always do this thing where you like work out how much you paid per goal, and that would take me down quite low. So I can't remember how much I paid, but that would be quite a low one. Nancy, finally to you then for what other game might you be keeping an eye on this weekend?
Yeah, I definitely think Chelsea Villa will be interesting because I've come across as a really big Villa fan this past hour, but I think there could be potential for an upset there. I think probably the other one would be Spurs Palace. I don't think it's the worst first game for Palace to have. And I'll just be interested to see what they're looking like against like a very well organised team in Spurs. So yeah, I'd probably say Spurs Palace.
Yeah, I was thinking that was an interesting one in terms of also seeing like the Spurs London derby is always nice, and then seeing the kind of new Spurs signings and how they cope without Clinton. But yeah, no, brilliant. Well, thank you all for joining us. There's been so many predictions in the chat that I've not been able to keep track of them, I'm afraid. But if you fancy scrolling through them, then do feel free, because there's plenty of them and all very different. But yeah, it's been brilliant to chat through everything. I guess final things then, Nancy, where can we find you to keep track of your work at the moment?
Yep. So that one there. That's my Twitter handle, and my Instagram handle is also kind of similar. It's Nancy Gillen _sport. I don't really post on Instagram much, but I probably should because Twitter's dying. But yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, most of my stuff is over there.
Awesome. And for you, Rob?
You find me at journalism_RP, but you can also now read my pieces this season at The Sporting News as well, where I've joined this year to write about the NWSL and the WSL, so look out for both of those.
Awesome. Thank you both for coming on tonight. It's been very insightful and interesting, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and I'll be looking forward to watching those games this weekend. Thanks obviously to Connor as well for his double header efforts, and we will see you next week.